Hello, and welcome to Indiana Issues, the public affairs program where we go beyond the headlines and sound bites and bring you all the news that concerns the great state of Indiana. Our guest today, a full panel of political prognosticators and pundits. We are joined by Lindsey Marie, Libertarian, straight up from Southern Indiana. Thank you for coming up to Indianapolis to join us today. Our good friend, Democrat Lara Beck. Lara, thanks for being with us.
Absolutely.
Political commentator Adam Wren. Adam, thanks for being here with us.
Good to be here.
And a conservative, sometimes Republican, depending on whether the party wants to deal with him, our good friend Rob Kendall, and also radio shows at WIBC. Rob, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Abdul.
We got lots of things to talk about today. And by the way, special thank you to our friends here at the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis for facilitating us, as they do every couple of weeks on this program. So big news item, the Kavanaugh hearings, and how does that impact the U.S. Senate race? As we all know, controversy ensued over Brett Kavanaugh's appointment with allegations of sexual misconduct levied against him by Christine Blasey Ford. She was the California professor who claims Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her more than 35 years ago. Some folks have called for a delay in the vote. There was some talk about them getting together maybe like this Monday, maybe not till later in the week. The Judiciary Committee says, we wanted her to testify, says I might, if there's an FBI, he's not in the room, et cetera, et cetera. We'll go ahead and start with you, Lara. Actually, we'll start with you, Adam. Claire McCaskill, because you tend to pay attention to a lot more of the national issues of Missouri. She has said that she's going to be a no vote. If you're Joe Donnelly, who's been kind of on the fence, what do you do here?
She's one of the 10 red state senators that has to confront this Supreme Court vote before the elections. I think for Donnelly, this really makes it an easy vote for him. I think he'll be a no on Kavanaugh if Kavanaugh indeed continues to be the nominee. Actually, if the nomination is held up, I actually think it cuts both ways. I think it's good for Mike Braun because he can go to the ballot in November and tell his voters, the Supreme Court is on the line. And for Donnelly, he can go to his base and said, I voted no on Kavanaugh, and that could increase turnout for him.
Lara, does this become, in sort of a weird way, a win-win, like Adam said, for both candidates, Mike Braun and Joe Donnelly, or does one have more to lose than the other?
I think Adam makes some great points about that, actually. And I think from Donnelly's perspective, he has always been very measured and very strategic and very thoughtful and very deliberative in how he comes to the conclusions on the Supreme Court justices. And so I think he's doing exactly what he needs to do. I think he's doing what people expect him to do. I don't think it's out of character for him. The challenge for Mike Braun becomes, and we're just going to defer all my time here in a minute to Rob. Boy, Rob, if there was a Google alert on Rob Kendall, it was popping this week. That's all I have to say. The challenge for Braun becomes that the base is a little more fragmented, and there's going to be a lot of people who are going to want to have that Supreme Court justice that gets pushed through. And also for Braun, the challenge becomes what President Trump does. We still don't know. Could he cut Kavanaugh loose? We don't know what strategy he's going to take, if he has a strategy at all. So there's a lot that remains to be seen on that.
Let's get Lindsey in here before we get to Mr. Google Alert over here.
If I'm Donnelly, I'm looking at some of the numbers that have come out lately, and I think it was Firefly Engagement was showing that those who were Democrats that are highly active in Indiana, 78% said they wanted him to go ahead and vote no, and only about 17 said vote yes. So when you start looking at that, he doesn't have as much to lose potentially, since he's already going to have that Democratic vote. Most Indiana Democrats aren't hardline progressives, so I don't think he has a lot to lose with saying yes on this one.
Rob?
It's going to be really interesting to see how that middle voter decides, right? Because we've talked about this on WIBC quite a bit, that's who's going to decide this election. Every poll, whether it's Donnelly in the lead by 2 or Braun in the lead by 2, it's within the margin of error, and it's totally up for grabs. And the other question is, does the average person care? Does the average person care about the Supreme Court?
I think that's probably,
because it doesn't directly impact them. So I think Laura's right. I think there's a much greater chance he votes no than, say, 2 weeks ago. The issue is going to become, does the public like Brett Kavanaugh? Is he a sellable guy? And does the public believe he's a sexual predator?
One of the things I noticed, Adam, two things. Unlike other situations, like, say, like a Roy Moore, where you had sort of a pattern of people coming forward saying, hey, this is inappropriate behavior that's been taking place, or like a Harvey Weinstein. With Brett Kavanaugh, it's deplorable behavior, it's true, but it's high school. It's 35 years ago. Democrats had this information back in July, but no one sort of maybe quietly had the committee do any investigation. Do those circumstances change the dynamics of sort of this situation than what we've seen in other places?
Well, we've yet to see another shoe drop in this case. There have been rumors in Washington, D.C. that the Washington Post is working on another story with possibly another accuser. But again, those remain rumors. It's fascinating to watch. I think that when you saw former President George W. Bush come out over the weekend and affirm his support for Brett Kavanaugh, that really sent a message to more moderate Republicans that this guy has an unimpeachable character as far as someone like Bush is concerned.
Laura, how does this compare to other situations where we've seen these type of allegations pop up, particularly in the Me Too universe?
Well, it's an incredibly complex issue. And there are a lot of layers to it, and there's a lot of emotion. I think that's always what we see a lot of, too. There's a lot of emotion. With this, I think one of the challenges here is that, yes, it happened in high school, and yes, it allegedly happened in high school. But at the same time, there is data out there that shows that victims don't come forward, and this is the reason why victims don't come forward. And so as this is being debated, as this is being discussed, especially in the context of Me Too, there's a lot of challenges that are ahead for Republicans and for Democrats, right? Because look at if Republican men on the Judiciary Committee, if they push this through, the optics of that are going to hurt them long term in the election, right? So you've got women who that could be a motivator to get women out who are angry in the Me Too era. They may decide it's worth pushing this through because they get this Supreme Court justice. I guess my question would be, you have an entire pool of conservative justices out there. Why, that you fully have vetted, why wouldn't you just say, look, this isn't the way we want to go. We're going to go with somebody else. So I understand there's so much at play, but at the same time, from a political standpoint, the Republicans could alienate an entire generation of women for elections to come. And I don't know if they want to do that at this point in time.
Let me get Lindsey in here before we get ready to move on to our next one. Lindsey, what is the sentiment outside of, I joke to say, the 465 bubble?
Yeah.
When you're down in Vanderburgh County, Evansville, Newburgh, talking to those folks, does this register on anybody's radar screen?
A little bit. Obviously, it's being highly publicized right now. But some of my libertarian friends and I have been talking about this. When you look at the coverage, not only necessarily about Dr. Ford, but just the hearing overall, you just keep hearing three words: Republicans, Democrats, and Garland. We're talking about a Supreme Court justice who's going to be charged with deciding if Republicans and Democrats, their laws are violating the Constitution. I don't care if it's a Republican. I don't care if it's a Democrat. I don't care what happened to Garland. I want to know that this person's going to uphold the Constitution and speak up when it's right.
Rob, I want to get your thoughts real quick here, because you made an interesting comment on social media about how a number of Republicans in Indiana are coming to Justice Kavanaugh's defense under these allegations, but these are some of the same people who've called on Attorney General Curtis Hill to resign and step down.
Yeah, and that's the problem, right? So like when Todd Young says Roy Moore must step aside, I was very upset about that, not because I don't think Roy Moore is a good guy, but the problem becomes if the mere accusation is enough to derail a person, then it applies to everyone. Roy Moore is a skis ball and a scumbag, but Brett Kavanaugh strikes me as a pretty good guy. Same thing with Curtis Hill. Probably guilty of at least something of what those women are saying, but the issue becomes if due process is not given when a good guy like Brett Kavanaugh steps up, the same rules should apply to everybody.
You are watching Indiana Issues, the public affairs program where we look at the issues facing the great state of Indiana. Our guests today are Libertarian Lindsey Marie, Democrat Lara Beck, political analyst Adam Wren, and conservative Rob Kendall. Another big topic this week, another poll in the U.S. Senate race, the American Association of Retired Persons. This one only polling voters over 50, which is why I thought this was actually a little bit more interesting than maybe some of the other polls we've seen. And if we get some of the results up on the screen there, that poll of 807 voters, Joe Donnelly, 38, Mike Braun, 35, the number of undecided voters, 28%. I did ask them, why not count Lucy Brenton? They said the party's got to get 10% in the last election, otherwise they don't count them. But if you look at an average of all four polls that have been basically taken, Donnelly 45, Braun 41, Brenton 5%. Lara Beck, is this good for Joe Donnelly, or is the only poll that matters the one on Election Day?
Well, the only poll that matters is on Election Day. But I think I've been saying this all along. Joe Donnelly is going to be fine. Joe Donnelly is going to win this. with all the news that's been coming out about Braun. Again, I'll cede my time over here to Rob shortly, but with all the news that's coming out with him and the fact that his campaign appears to be on life support, that he's going to be fine. It's just me and where I'm at right now, but the numbers as the way they're pulling together, I think he's going to come through.
How frustrating is this sometimes, Lucy, for the Libertarian Party? Because some polls you're included, some polls you're not. Some polls they say, hey, you got to get 10%, or does it really matter at all?
When we look at these polls, I think what it says more about the people doing the polls. They're giving into partisan games, and they're going to hurt their credibility in the long term. Another thing that's kind of happening now is you have legal analysts saying that if a poll is conducted or a community group holds a debate or there's a televised debate and they don't invite everyone that's going to be on the ballot, they better be reporting that to the FEC for a campaign contribution to the ones that were invited. And the ones that aren't, they're actually starting to follow up on that. So I really hope the AARP is going to go ahead and file this, because they also conducted 2 town halls with both Donnelly and Braun, but where was Lucy?
Can I just say, though, that
Sure.
I didn't realize that 50 was the baseline for AARP.
Yes, it is.
That just okay. Good
Yeah.
to know. Thanks.
I still got a couple years left before I start
Gonna
getting this
start
stuff in the
drinking
mail.
my green juices here really quick.
Rob, anything in this poll surprise you?
No, I think it's right where both candidates deserve to be, because somebody didn't tell Mike Braun it is legal to campaign in September in the state of Indiana. I mean, this guy...
Don't
look,
hold back. Tell us what you're really
Well, I mean, one of the reasons I voted for Luke Messner, and by the way, I waited until about 5:55 on election day to vote because I didn't want to vote for any of these guys on the Republican side, is I felt there was a highly fraudulent nature to Braun's campaign. It was, I'm the outsider. I don't need the special interest money. I'm self-funding. None of that has happened in the general election, and anybody who is paying attention realized that would happen. And you have a guy who has not been the same candidate in the general election that he was in the primary. And there's something disturbing when you're more aggressive on taking on Todd Rokita and Luke Messner than you have been Joe Donnelly.
Adam, when you look at this poll compared to all the other ones, like I said, it continues to show a very, very close race. But once again, Joe Donnelly, for the most part, is either tied or in the lead.
Yeah, one of the things about this poll, it was last in the field in the middle of August. So this is before Labor Day. This is before Donnelly even met with Kavanaugh. So I think we have to take that with a grain of salt. It's also a poll of registered voters, not likely voters, although we do know that older Hoosiers tend to vote more in midterms like this. But I do think it's accurate and directionally showing that there is a gap and that Braun is running 3 to 4 points behind a Democrat in a state that Trump won by 19 points in 2016. Which in and of itself is fascinating.
Yeah, Abdul, one thing, if I could piggyback on that. He was on WIBC the other day, and he was talking about, well, it's really hard to raise money, and we started $6 million behind Joe Donnelly. But wait a second. In the primary, it was, I'm the rich guy, I'm the business guy, I'm self-funding. That doesn't fly, right? You can't be complaining about no money when in the primary, you're the guy who's self-funding.
Can I make an observation,
I was going to ask you about that, Laura.
I just want to, can I say something? I'm
Sure.
sorry. I'm just going to, it's like we're still debating. It's like we're back to where we were. Can I just make an observation, though? Mike Braun in September should not be on WIBC talking to Tony Katz.
That's a good point.
He should not be. He's talking to the base. So right now, at this point in the campaign, he should be in Evansville in Vanderburgh County. He should not be doing a thing with the base. And I think that is sort of intrinsically what their issue is with their campaign right now.
To your point, there's a top Indiana Republican that I talked to just a few hours ago who points at Braun's wealth, personal wealth, and says, if he has anywhere between $20 and $80 million and we get to October, how much is he going to pony up from his own account? I mean, that's something that that Republicans are starting to talk about.
You also get to a point, too, where it's almost too late to throw in your own money because the narrative has been defined.
And that was going to be
these IE accounts coming in, especially on the Democrat side, you're seeing a lot more money being spent because these are incredibly critical races for them. So that's also
be my question real quickly for the whole panel is, did the Braun people just, because I've spoken to some of the same Republicans, Adam, that you probably have, that give me the, hey, I like him, he's a good guy, but gosh darn, he's really not just lighting the fire. And when I get this at a Hamilton County Republican fall dinner, which is ground zero for Republican politics in Indiana, and even those guys are a little, I'm not sure how this is going to pan out. Did the Braun people just not successfully figure out how to pivot from a primary to a general election?
I think, one thing to think about is the people doing his race, the market red strategies. This is the highest level race that they've ever done. I think that's something to keep in mind. They typically do, state level races. So I think that's an interesting talking point that will come to the fore again. If Braun loses, there will be a lot of finger pointing there.
Lindsey?
So I think this goes back to even before the primary, though. My sources in D.C. with NRSC were saying if a third-party challenger entered that race, regardless of who had won the Republican primary, Donnelly automatically would win because they can't cover the 5% spread no matter how they looked at it. And you look at high-dollar Republican donors, they're smart with their money. They're not going to waste it, and they want a good ROI. For them, this is not a good ROI, and that's why you see a lot of the PACs not donating. You see a lot of the donors going to Texas. And you see this in Wisconsin right now. Every Republican donor is pulled out of that race because Baldwin automatically wins. You can tell. What does
Well, they're going about it the wrong way, and they being the Republicans. The number one thing Braun sold himself on was the narrative, right? Messer and Rokita, career politicians, party insiders. Braun, I'm the business guy, I'm the outsider. Most of these ads that you're seeing are anti-Donnelly ads, and it's really tough to convince people who like a guy, even if they won't vote for him, that they like a guy, that he's a bad guy. Same mistake Republicans made with Obama. Braun's ads should be talking about narratives, why you should vote for him. It's the same mistake Rokita made. The super negative ads don't work, especially if you have a record or a narrative you can run on.
What's interesting to me is that the very thing that set Braun apart in the primary, the guy in the blue shirt between two guys in suits, could be the thing that that ends his campaign in November. At the end of the day, he's just another white guy in a blue shirt.
I think it was the NBA player. NBA
player ad.
I think it was the NBA player ad. The other part, though, I would say is having been on inside political campaigns, as most of you have here as well, is that this type of narrative and these type of articles, I mean, that Sladisco article in the AP was pretty damning for them. That is a psychological blow to your campaign. And it is really hard to recover from that because you either go into the bunker and say, this is our plan, this is our strategy, and we are going to execute it on this plan. Or you start doubting what you're doing. And then you start listening to people from the outside who are saying, oh, you need to change traffic, you need to change firms, you need to do this, you need to do that. Either way, you're not focused on your campaign. You're fighting not just the Democrat, but you're fighting people within your own party on the direction of how your campaign should go. And that's not a place you want to be in mid-September.
You are watching Indiana Issues, the public affairs program, where we go beyond the headlines and sound bites and really get to the heart of stories fitting in Indiana politics. Our guests today are Libertarian Lindsey Marie, Democrat Lara Beck, analyst Adam Wren, and conservative commentator Rob Kendall. Speaking of Mike Braun, since we were talking about Mike Braun, an AP story out saying Republicans worried about the Braun campaign. To part to continue our conversation we had recently, major groups have sort of sat out on the sidelines. I want to say the AP story mentioned the state chamber. I've been told that Americans for Prosperity have decided to, now we're just going to redirect our talent and energy elsewhere. Up until, I'll say recently, Mike Braun hadn't really bought any television time here in Indiana. They just spent about $600,000 in October. There's been the question about how many events that he does in a week, Joe Donnelly does in a day. Rob Kendall, you made some Republicans said some unflattering comments about Mike Braun. Can Mike Braun, I mean, we still got 50 days and change out. Can Mike Braun turn this around?
Well, sure, but nobody in any sales job, and that's what politics is, it's the ultimate sales job, right? You're convincing people to buy you, and the buy you is yes at the ballot box. Nobody's going to sell you the way you sell yourself. And when you go to a rally where there's almost 12,000 people, and I know Lindsey was there, in the Ford Center, they're passionate, they're excited, they're fired up. Trump's there, you're on stage with Donald Trump, and you just have zero enthusiasm. That's your chance to shine. You're on national television. You're appearing in front of donors. You're appearing in front of activists. And the best you can do is Joe's got to go. It's a total missed opportunity. And you don't even sound excited about that. I said, if that were me and I'm on stage with Trump, and I'm a huge Trump fan, but I'd be like James Brown and the Blues Brothers running down the aisle shouting, do you see the light? A total missed opportunity.
Lindsey, let me ask you about that, because you were at the rally in Evansville when the president was here for Mike Braun. All that energy, all the enthusiasm, was that for the president or was it for Mike Braun?
It was for the president. I don't know that everyone in that room even knew who Mike Braun was, to be honest. And Rob and I talked about this before. An 8th grader in debate club could have done a better performance than what Mike Braun did. what did you, I mean, I don't think it's stage fright. I can't figure out what it was, but it fell so flat. And if he has another performance like that in the debates, it's going to just keep keep snowballing for him.
Sometimes you're just not ready for prime time. I mean, that happens. That's my word. That's my word of wisdom today.
It's like, wow, that's like the shortest you've ever heard.
I know. There you go.
Adam, but to piggyback on Laura's thing, is it just a situation where Mike Braun, maybe he's just a better primary candidate than a better general election candidate? They just didn't realize how they would have to pivot and how they have to shift from a primary campaign against two people who are basically almost sort of carbon copies of each other, Todd Rokita, Luke Messer, to a general election, which is a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah, I think two things. The first thing is we can talk about Mike Braun, but we also have to talk about what Joe Donnelly's doing. Joe Donnelly is running the race of his life, and Republicans will concede that. He's really running hard. He's up at dark and goes home at dark. And he's doubled the number of events in a year, more than doubled what Braun has done. The second thing is, if you talk to Republicans, they'll concede that they'd like to see Braun do more. However, their theory of the case is the one thing that's going to change from now until November is that a shower of money is going to rain down on Indiana. And there's nothing really at the end of the day that Donnelly and Braun can do to change the trajectory of this race. It's all going to be decided by outside money.
But I guess the question is, and Lindsey, you're shaking your head. I'm going to get you to chime in here. Like I said, we've seen so much money and so much time, so much money and resources spent here in Indiana, and at the end of the day, all you got to show for it is a race in a place where Donald Trump won by 20 points is still statistically a tie. And at one point, if you're in the donor class, say, you know what? Good luck and Godspeed, John Glenn. I'm throwing my money over here.
They never even really showed up to begin with. If you looked at how much money he has and how much he's raised, and the majority of it's from his own money. Also, they're not showing up, actually. So today I actually made a few phone calls before this to people in D.C. that are high up in the GOP, and they said Indiana's not on our radar anymore. We're focused on Texas. We're focused elsewhere. There's no reason to pour our money into it. And with the IEs that could have helped him, they can't do it within 30 days prior to the election. So that's also going to be a big factor. He's not going to have this October surprise of a money bomb from anyone. If he does, it's from his own bank account.
And real quick, two things. One is Joe Donnelly's very well liked, and we talked about this yesterday on IBC, which is his constituent services are phenomenal.
They are.
If you call his office, Democrat, Republican, whatever, people like him. So that's going against him. The other thing for Braun, Todd Young was everywhere all the time. When Evan Bayh declared, I met with Todd Young's campaign manager day after. He's like, we're excited. Let's do it. We're going to beat this dude. He was everywhere all the time. Mike Braun is not Todd Young.
What does it tell you, Laura, before we move on to our next one, that Republicans would rather spend the time, energy, and resources, if everything that Lindsey told us is factually accurate, which I have no reason to doubt of veracity, they would spend their money trying to save Ted Cruz in Texas than winning for Mike Braun in Indiana?
Well, it's the state of our political environment. It really is. And what's fascinating to me is after Trump won in Indiana, there was such this groundswell from the Republicans of a little bit of from the GOP, a little bit of cockiness, like we're getting that Senate seat, like that is our birthright. And I think what a lot of folks tend to forget is in Hoosiers, we still like a little bit of balance of power. And so there's also a little bit of practicality there. And Donnelly does have a great staff. He has an excellent staff. He also is someone who's incredibly accessible. He's out and about. He is easy to talk to. He's very approachable. He's relatable, which makes a big difference. I tend to gauge things too sometimes based on data, but also based on at my son's school's parking lot pickup when parents come up to me and say, God, I love Joe Donnelly. And these are people who probably aren't voting Democrat. So there's also that too. He's bipartisan, and people like having a bipartisan person in D.C.
We got about 5 minutes left and some change. Our guests, we're talking to our Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, and analytical friends. Indiana Finance Authority approved just this week unanimously to finance the governor's plan, generate $1 billion for the toll road due to increases for heavy trucks. That would free up state funds for other projects such as roads, broadband, trails. Critics say the governor did not consult with lawmakers. Trucks say this is unfair. Some folks saying it might even be unconstitutional. Adam Wren, is this the way we're just going to end up paying for public financial projects? projects going forward. There we go. I could talk now.
I think so. I think if you talk to Republicans, at the state level, they're really happy with Holcomb's plan and the way that it was rolled out. I think truckers have a much bigger problem to deal with, which is most of those jobs are going to disappear 10 to 20 to 30 years from now with automation. So I think a 35% increase is the least of their long-term worries.
Laura?
Well, it's politically safe. I mean, he's going to hurt truckers and he's going to hopefully repair some roads so we're not dodging potholes on the interstate in September. Which
I'm more
we still
concerned about
are.
the potholes here in Indianapolis.
Okay, well, we'll go. We'll go afterwards. We'll go afterwards on our scooters. It's a politically safe way to do it. If he can get,
I'll go bird, not lime, if that makes you feel better.
If he can get 69 finished, I mean, that thing just continues to move on. So not surprising they went this route.
Yeah. Lindsay, any thoughts?
As a libertarian, I heard a quote that just made me cringe. And he said, it's okay because we're getting the money from someone else. And he meant outsiders, people that don't live in Indiana. And it's just this idea of taxation and taking the money from somebody else to give to somebody else that I'm completely against.
I've said this for 3 or 4 years now. Democrats need to start winning some elections in this state because the Republicans are lazy, they're arrogant, they're not. I mean, the legislature conceded.
Tell us how you really feel, Rob. Jeez.
I mean,
You want to sit in Laura's chair next time?
the Republicans, I mean, it's so unbelievable. The Republicans conceded their ability in the legislature to veto this tax increase. They gave it away during the gas tax that he can basically unilaterally unlimited tolling. And they did it because they don't want to be the ones raising taxes. But again, until the Democrats start putting serious people out and start winning elections, Republicans are going to keep doing it because it's the easiest way to buy votes.
Adam, just real fast, real quick. It's interesting to talk about the sort of automation that's coming. Is that where the folks in the trucking industry should be spending their time and energy and effort as opposed to the toll issue?
Yeah, I mean, this is a critical issue that no one, even on the national level, has begun to grapple with yet. I mean, Tesla has a semi that's automated right now. It's going to change. It's going to affect tens of millions of jobs, particularly here in the middle of the country in places like Iowa and Indiana. These people are going to have to find new jobs and new careers, and it's something that we need to transcend the electoral cycle and actually focus on now and get our best and brightest thinking about how we're going to retrain this group of workers.
We're down to the last segment of our program where we ask for predictions and prognostications. What are you all looking at? What are you paying attention to? What should Hoosiers keep their eye on? Lindsay, since you're new, we'll start with you.
Well, I've been watching actually the New Mexico Senate race. Gary Johnson entered quite late, but he is number 2 right now in all the polls. He's gaining momentum quite quickly on that Democrat. And if he gets elected, that's going to be a whole game changer for the balance of power.
Laura?
Hoosier Women Forward. It is an organization of Democrat women that is training, mentoring, lifting up Democrat women. They're going to have their first event next week at a lunch, and I'm very excited to see what these women are going to accomplish and do.
Actually, we'll be talking to Rima Shahid next week.
And
on
I
the
was going to
radio
say
program.
that, and I just really want my son's football team to win this weekend.
Adam?
Be nice.
I'm continuing to watch the ascent of Republican Senator Todd Young in the Senate. There's talk that after the elections in November, he will become the next NRSC chair and be in charge with a lot of 2020 races. He's kind of on a prolific fundraising run right now and could ultimately be headed to the Finance Committee, which is a powerful Senate committee that a lot of people think would be good for Hoosiers and good for Indiana. So that's something that I'm watching right now.
Rob Kendall?
Well, first of all, if I disappear, I'm going to slide you a name of 10 high-ranking Republicans that are prime suspects, so I'll let you keep that. I think Donnelly's vote on this, on Kavanaugh, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what he does and his reasoning behind it and see if that has any impact on the midterm elections.
All right. Well, those are the predictions from our panel. Our guests today have been Lindsey Marie, Libertarian, Democrat Lara Beck, analyst Adam Wren, and conservative Rob Kendall. Thank you all very, very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. Thank you
Thanks.
for joining us here on Indiana Issues. Special thanks to our friends here at Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org, and we'll talk to you next time on Indiana Issues.